August 4th, 1962. Vinnie Torino had been Marilyn Monroe's bodyguard for 18 months, the man she trusted with her life. That's exactly why the studio bosses never saw him coming. The Ambassador Hotel's service elevator climbed to the penthouse. Vinnie stepped out, gun drawn, and found Tony Marcelli mixing pills into Monroe's champagne. The bartender they'd hired to make her final performance look like an accident. Vinnie pulled the trigger without hesitation. What happened in those next 3 minutes rewrote Hollywood history. Monroe lived, Marcelli died, and the studio executives who ordered the hit suddenly had a much bigger problem than a troubled starlet threatening to expose their secrets. The sound that changed everything wasn't the gunshot. It was Monroe's voice on the hidden recording device she'd been wearing all night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The blood pooled beneath Tony Marcelli's body in perfect crimson silence, while Marilyn Monroe's trembling fingers found the champagne flute he'd been doctoring. She held it up to the amber light of the penthouse suite, watching the undissolved pills swirl like deadly snow. "Jesus Christ, Vinnie!" Her voice carried that breathless quality that made million-dollar pictures, but now it shook with something raw and primal. They really wanted me dead. Vinnie kept his. Trained on Marcelli's corpse, muscle memory from 15 years on the force refusing to let him holster the weapon until he was certain. The bartender's eyes stared at nothing. A neat hole punched through his forehead where Vinnie's bullet had found its mark. Clean, professional, final. "The recording device," Vinnie said, his own voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Turn it off." Monroe's hand moved to the small microphone taped beneath her dress, the one they'd agreed she would wear to tonight's meeting with the studio executives. Insurance, they'd called it. Evidence of the threats against her if she didn't stay quiet about the affairs, the cover-ups, the dirty money flowing through legitimate productions. They never expected the executives to move this fast. Wait. Monroe's finger hovered over the stop button. Someone should hear this. Someone should know what these bastards tried to do. Through the penthouse windows, Los Angeles sprawled in glittering darkness, a city built on beautiful lies and profitable secrets. Down there, people were watching her movies in drive-ins, buying magazines with her face on the cover, living vicariously through the fantasy of Marilyn Monroe. None of them knew how close that fantasy had come to ending tonight. Vinnie finally lowered his weapon. "You can't release that tape, Marilyn. Not ever." "Why the hell not?" She set down the poisoned champagne and turned to face him fully. Without her studio makeup, she looked younger somehow, more vulnerable, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. "They tried to murder me, Vinnie, in cold blood, with a hired killer. And I just killed that hired killer." Vinnie gestured toward Marcelli's body, in cold blood, without warning, without trying to arrest him first. He moved to the window, scanning the street below for any sign of movement, any indication that someone else was coming. "That recording makes me a murderer, not a hero." The weight of what he'd done settled over the room like smoke from a snuffed candle. Vinnie had pulled triggers before, in Korea, in dark alleys as a beat cop, in the gray areas where police work met street justice. But this was different. This was execution, pure and simple, even if it was the right choice. Monroe walked to her purse and pulled out a cigarette with shaking hands. "So what do we do now? Pretend this never happened? Let them try again? We make them think you're dead." The words surprised even Vinnie as they left his mouth, but once spoken, the plan crystallized in his mind with startling clarity. He'd seen enough crime scenes, enough staged suicides, enough carefully orchestrated cover-ups to know exactly how it could work. "We use their own plan against them," he continued, thinking out loud. Marcelli was supposed to make this look like an overdose, accidental, maybe suicide if they needed it to stick. "We give them exactly what they wanted, Marilyn Monroe's tragic death. Except you walk away from it alive." Monroe's lighter clicked 3 times before her hands steadied enough to catch the flame. "And Tony?" "Tony broke into your penthouse. I caught him in the act. Shot him defending you, but it was too late. You'd already taken the pills he forced down your throat." I'm the grieving bodyguard who failed to save Hollywood's brightest star. The cigarette smoke curled between them, carrying the acrid scent of burned tobacco and burned bridges. Once they crossed this line, there would be no going back. Marilyn Monroe would have to die for the woman behind the name to survive. "What about the recording?" she asked. Vinnie looked at the small device still taped beneath her dress, its mechanical wheels turning silently, capturing every word of their conspiracy. In that moment, he realized they were creating evidence of something far more dangerous than the studio's murder plot. They were documenting their own elaborate deception, complete with his confession to killing Marcelli in cold blood. "We keep it," he said finally. "Insurance. If anyone ever tries to expose what really happened tonight, we have proof of why we did what we did." Monroe nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a shared secret. They were about to become co-conspirators in one of Hollywood's greatest deceptions, bound together by blood and lies and the terrible mathematics of survival. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance, not coming toward them yet, but a reminder that the real world was still turning, still demanding answers they weren't prepared to give. Vinnie checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, it would be August 5th, 1962, the day Marilyn Monroe died. They had 12 minutes to kill a legend and birth a ghost. Introduction. The amber liquid swirled against crystal as Vinnie lifted the glass to his lips, the weight of 58 years settling into his shoulders like an old coat. Outside his Burbank apartment window, the November rain drummed against glass with the persistence of memory, each drop a small percussion in the symphony of Los Angeles drowning in its own reflection. 33 years. 33 years since that August night when he'd helped bury Marilyn Monroe and birth Norma Jean Baker's second life. The bourbon burned familiar paths down his throat, but it couldn't wash away the taste of cigarette smoke and conspiracy that still lingered in quiet moments like these. The television murmured from the corner, some late-night talk show where beautiful people discussed their beautiful lives with practiced ease. Vinnie reached for the remote, then stopped. The starlet on screen had honey blonde hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, and when she smiled, something in his chest twisted with pride and terror in equal measure. "Just wrapped filming on Midnight in Malibu," his daughter was saying, her voice carrying that careful modulation they taught at acting schools. Professional, polished, nothing like the breathless excitement she'd had as a child when she'd tell him about her day at school, back when she still believed her father was a hero instead of a well-dressed gravedigger. Elena Torino. She'd kept his name even after she'd stopped returning his calls. 26 years old now, rising through Hollywood's ranks with the kind of determination that reminded him uncomfortably of another blonde with dreams too big for a world too small to contain them safely. The interviewer leaned forward with predatory interest. "Any truth to the rumors about your relationship with director James Morrison? Our sources say you two have been seen together quite a bit lately." Elena's smile never wavered, but Vinnie caught the micro-expression that flashed across her features, the same look she'd worn at 8 years old when neighborhood bullies cornered her at the playground. His fingers tightened around the glass. "James and I work well together," she said smoothly. "Sometimes the best professional relationships develop into personal friendships." Friendship. Vinnie had done enough background checks to know exactly what kind of friendship Morrison specialized in. The kind that ended with young actresses finding themselves blacklisted when they became inconvenient. The kind that required men like Vinnie to stand in hotel corridors at 3 in the morning, watching for threats that came wearing Armani suits and studio credentials. His phone buzzed against the coffee table, jarring him from the television's hypnotic glow. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but after 15 years in private security, unknown numbers at midnight rarely brought good news. Torino. Static crackled across the connection, followed by the distant sound of machinery, something mechanical and rhythmic, like gears turning in careful precision. Then a voice, distorted by electronics but unmistakably deliberate. "Vincent." "It's been a long time." The bourbon glass slipped from his fingers, crystal exploding against hardwood in a spray of amber and sharp edges. On the television, Elena laughed at something the host had said, the sound bright and oblivious and suddenly fragile as spun sugar. "Who is this?" But even as Vinnie asked the question, his mind was cataloging possibilities, running through faces from the past like a grim Rolodex of potential disasters. Someone who remembers August 5th, 1962. Someone who knows what really happened in that penthouse suite. The apartment's familiar walls seemed to contract, 33 years of careful distance collapsing into a single moment of exposure. Vinny's free hand moved automatically to his hip, muscle memory reaching for a service weapon he no longer carried. Instead, his fingers found only the worn leather of his belt, as useless as the civilian life he'd built on foundations of buried secrets. "You've got the wrong number," he said, but his voice carried no conviction. On screen, Elena was discussing her upcoming projects, her future spread out before her like a red carpet leading toward success and recognition and all the beautiful dangers that came with both. "Package arrives tomorrow morning," the voice continued, ignoring his denial. "10th anniversary of our mutual friend's little problem. You'll want to be home to sign for it personally." The line went dead, leaving only the television's cheerful chatter and the sound of rain against glass. Vinny stared at his phone until the screen went dark, then looked down at the scattered crystal fragments glittering like stars across his floor. Each piece reflected Elena's face from a different angle, a kaleidoscope of the life he'd tried so hard to protect from the shadows of his past. Outside, Los Angeles continued its endless performance, a city built on the principle that reality was negotiable and history belonged to whoever told the most convincing story. But in the silence of his apartment, surrounded by the debris of his disrupted peace, Vinny felt the weight of absolute truth settling over him like a burial shroud. Someone knew. After 33 years, someone finally knew what he'd done that night to save one woman's life. And now they wanted something in return. On television, Elena smiled at the camera with perfect Hollywood confidence, completely unaware that her father's carefully constructed world was about to collapse around them both. The doorbell rang at 9:47 a.m., cutting through the coffee-scented silence of Vinny's morning like a blade through silk. He'd been awake since 4, sitting in his kitchen chair with his service revolver disassembled on the table before him, cleaning, checking, preparing for whatever truth was about to walk through his door wearing a delivery uniform and a practiced smile. Through the peephole, the courier looked exactly like every other courier in Los Angeles, young, efficient, bored by the routine of moving packages from point A to point B, without caring about the contents that might reshape lives or bury bodies. The kid held a medium-sized box wrapped in brown paper, no return address visible from Vinny's angle. "Vincent Torino?" The courier's voice carried the flat professionalism of someone who'd made 1,000 similar deliveries and expected nothing more than a signature and a door closing in his face. Vinny's hand hovered over the deadbolt. 33 years of careful anonymity had taught him that packages arriving without invitation rarely contained good news. But the voice on the phone had been specific. He needed to sign for this personally. Someone wanted his fingerprints on the chain of custody, wanted proof that Vincent Torino had willingly accepted whatever Pandora's box they were delivering. The signature felt like signing his own death warrant. Alone in his apartment, Vinny set the package on his coffee table and stared at it for 27 minutes before finding the courage to tear away the brown paper. Inside, a wooden box, the kind used for expensive cigars or cheap jewelry, depending on who was doing the buying. The wood was aged, worn smooth by handling, and when he lifted the lid, the scent of old leather and tobacco drifted upward like ghosts escaping a crypt. The photograph lay on top, black and white, grainy with the quality of film pushed beyond its limits in low light. But the image was unmistakable. Marilyn Monroe's penthouse suite, August 5, 1962, 12:03 a.m. according to the timestamp burned into the corner. Tony Marcelli's body sprawled across expensive carpet, blood pooling beneath his shattered skull. And there, kneeling beside the corpse with his smoking, still in hand, was a younger Vincent Torino. Someone had been watching. Someone had been recording. All these years, while he'd carried the weight of that night like a stone in his chest, someone else had been carrying proof. Beneath the photograph, wrapped in tissue paper that cracked with age, lay a reel-to-reel tape. The label was written in careful script, "The Truth About Marilyn, August 5, 1962, original recording." But this wasn't the tape he remembered. wasn't the small device that had been hidden beneath Monroe's dress during their meeting. This was something else entirely, a professional recording, the kind used by surveillance teams or blackmail artists with expensive equipment and patient schedules. His hands shook as he unwound the tissue paper further, revealing a letter beneath the tape. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, the kind used for wedding invitations or funeral announcements. The handwriting was precise, controlled, the work of someone who understood that words, like bullets, could kill when properly aimed. Vincent, by now you've seen the photograph. You know what I have. What you don't know is how long I've been waiting to use it. 33 years ago, you killed Tony Marcelli in cold blood. Self-defense, you might argue. Protection of an innocent, you might claim. But the tape tells a different story. It tells the story of a corrupt cop who helped fake America's sweetheart's death for reasons that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with profit. The recording device under her dress wasn't the only one in that room. Professional surveillance requires redundancy, Mr. Torino, insurance. And I've been very, very patient about cashing in my policy. Your daughter is beautiful. Elena has her mother's eyes, doesn't she? Same storm cloud gray, same trusting innocence. She's building quite a career for herself. It would be tragic if something were to happen to that career, or to Elena herself. $2 million. Cash, unmarked bills in denominations no larger than hundreds. You have 72 hours to acquire the funds. Instructions for delivery will follow. Don't contact the police. Don't try to run. Don't even think about playing hero again. I know where Elena lives, where she works, where she buys her morning coffee. I know about the security company you run, about your client list, about every carefully constructed lie you've built your new life upon. The past has a way of catching up, Vincent, especially when it's been following you this closely for this long. Tick-tock. The letter wasn't signed, but in the bottom corner, embossed into the paper like a watermark, was a small symbol, a camera lens surrounded by musical notes. Someone who recorded secrets for a living. Someone who'd been patient enough to wait 3 decades for the perfect moment to strike. Vinny's coffee had gone cold on the table beside him, but he barely noticed. The apartment felt different now, contaminated by the presence of evidence he'd thought was buried forever. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound from the hallway more ominous. Someone had been watching him for 33 years, collecting ammunition, waiting for the moment when he'd built something worth destroying. Elena's face smiled at him from the entertainment center, a promotional headshot from her latest film, all perfect teeth and professional confidence. She had no idea that her father's sins were about to become her inheritance, no idea that the man who'd tried so hard to protect her had just become the greatest threat to her safety. Outside, Los Angeles continued its eternal performance, but inside his apartment, Vincent Torino felt the weight of absolute reckoning settling over him like a funeral shroud. The past hadn't just caught up, it had been stalking him all along, waiting for the perfect moment to demand payment in full. Early development. Vinny slammed the wooden box shut and shoved it into the kitchen cabinet behind a stack of cereal boxes, as if hiding the evidence could somehow unmake its existence. The movement was instinctive, desperate, the same impulse that made children close their eyes during horror movies, believing that not seeing the monster would make it disappear. But when he turned around, Elena's promotional photo still smiled at him from the entertainment center, and the embossed camera lens symbol was burned into his retinas like a brand. 72 hours, $2 million, a lifetime of careful construction about to be demolished by someone who'd been collecting demolition charges for 3 decades. He pulled out his phone and dialed Elena's number before rational thought could intervene. The call went straight to voicemail, her voice bright and professional, asking callers to leave a message for her representation. The sound of her recorded words made his chest tight. When had she stopped answering his calls personally? When had he become someone who needed to go through agents and assistants to reach his own daughter? Elena, it's Dad. Call me back when you get this. It's important. He almost added more. Warnings about being careful, about watching for strangers, about the shadows that might be following her through her perfectly ordered Hollywood life. But those words would require explanations he wasn't prepared to give. The bourbon called to him from the kitchen counter, promising temporary amnesia and liquid courage. But alcohol had never solved problems, only postponed them, and this particular problem had already waited 33 years for its moment. He needed clarity, not sedation. Instead, he called Tommy Marcelli. The number was buried in his phone's contacts under a false name, Tom Martinez, Plumbing, a cover identity that had seemed clever 15 years ago when Tommy first reached out. The phone rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered, suspicious and sleep-roughened. "Yeah? Tommy, it's Vinny. We need to talk." The silence stretched long enough for Vinny to hear traffic in the background, the distant sound of construction equipment. Tommy was probably on some job site, installing pipes or fixing water heaters, living the legitimate life he'd built after his brother Tony's death had ended the family's more colorful business enterprises. "Jesus, Vinny, you know I don't like talking on phones. This can't wait. Someone's got pictures from that night." Another silence, this one sharp with understanding. Tommy Marcelli might have traded his family's criminal legacy for honest work, but he hadn't traded his survival instincts. He knew exactly which night Vinny meant, and he knew what pictures from that night could do to both their carefully reconstructed lives. "Where?" Paulie's 1 hour. The line went dead without pleasantries or goodbyes. Tommy had learned, like Vinny, that some conversations were too dangerous for electronic ears, that certain truths required the intimacy of whispered words and paranoid glances over shoulders. Paulie's delicatessen occupied a corner on Ventura Boulevard that looked exactly like 1,000 other corners in the valley. Unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of place where 2 middle-aged men could sit in a back booth and discuss ancient history without attracting attention from tourists or federal surveillance teams. The pastrami was decent, the coffee was strong, and the owner had learned decades ago not to remember faces or conversations. Tommy was already waiting when Vinny arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door. 15 years of honest labor had thickened his waistline and grayed his temples, but his gaze still held the predatory awareness of someone who'd survived his brother's violent world by never fully trusting anyone, including friends. "You look like shit," Tommy said without preamble. Vinny slid into the opposite seat, noting how Tommy's hands stayed flat on the table, visible, non-threatening, but ready to move quickly if the situation required violence. Old habits from a dangerous family, muscle memory that honest work couldn't completely erase. "Someone knows, Tommy, about Tony, about what really happened." Tommy's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "That's impossible. Everyone who was there is dead or," he gestured vaguely at Vinny, "or sitting in this booth. The photographs say otherwise." "What photographs?" Vinny described the package, the timestamp, the professional quality of the surveillance. Tommy listened without interruption, his expression growing more grim with each detail. When Vinny mentioned the $2 million demand, Tommy actually flinched. "They want money," Tommy said finally. "That's good. Money problems have solutions. It's the ones who want justice or revenge who kill you. They threatened Elena." The words hung between them like smoke from an extinguished candle. Tommy's face went carefully blank, the expression of a man calculating odds and finding them unacceptable. "Tommy, I need to know. Did Tony have partners that night? Someone who might have been watching? Someone who got away?" Tommy was already shaking his head before Vinny finished the question. Tony worked alone, always. It was his thing. But something flickered in his eyes, a hesitation that spoke of secrets within secrets. "What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing. I'm telling you nothing, and you're asking nothing." Tommy stood abruptly, tossing bills on the table, and we're not having this conversation. He walked away without looking back, leaving Vinny alone with his cold coffee and the growing certainty that his attempts to stay safe had just failed spectacularly. Middle development. Vinny sat in the deli booth long after Tommy disappeared, watching coffee grow cold while his mind dissected every nuance of their conversation. Tony worked alone, always. The words carried conviction, but the hesitation in Tommy's eyes told a different story. The kind of hesitation that came from protecting secrets that weren't entirely his own. The drive back to his apartment felt like swimming through quicksand. Every red light stretched into eternity. Every pedestrian crossing the street moved with suspicious deliberation, Every car that followed the same route for more than 3 blocks became potential surveillance. 33 years of carefully managed paranoia had taught him the difference between reasonable caution and dangerous exposure. This felt like the latter. His phone buzzed as he pulled into the parking garage. Elena's number. "Dad, you sounded weird on your message. Is everything okay?" Her voice carried the particular quality of concern that came from having a father who'd spent her childhood teaching her to notice things other children never had to consider: exits in restaurants, strangers who lingered too long in public spaces, the importance of varying routines. Lessons that had seemed like paranoid overprotection at the time, but had probably kept them both alive during the dangerous early years. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just wanted to hear your voice." The lie came easily, polished by decades of practice. "How's the new project going?" "Dad." The single word carried 15 years of experience reading his emotional weather patterns. "You never ask about work unless something's wrong. What's going on?" Vinny closed his eyes, leaning against the steering wheel in the garage's artificial twilight. Elena had inherited her mother's intuition, along with those storm-gray eyes, the ability to hear truth in silence and deception in careful words. Sarah had possessed the same talent, the same uncomfortable gift for seeing through his professional facades to the damaged man underneath. "I've been thinking about your mother lately," he said, which was true enough, about the choices I made back then, about what I lost. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for him to hear Elena's breathing, the soft sound of someone choosing words carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the gentleness of someone navigating emotional landmines. "You didn't lose me, Dad. I'm right here." But for how long? The thought hit him with the force of physical pain. Elena's career was everything Sarah had dreamed of. The recognition, the success, the beautiful life built on talent rather than compromise. And now someone was threatening to destroy it all because of a decision he'd made when Elena was barely old enough to walk. "I know you are. There are things from before you were born, things that might surface. If they do, I need you to know that everything I did was to protect you and your mother." "Dad, you're scaring me." Good. Fear kept people alive in his world. But Elena didn't live in his world. She lived in the bright public sphere where fear was something actors performed on camera, not something that followed you home at night and made you check locks twice before sleeping. "Promise me something," he said. "Vary your routine for the next few weeks. Different coffee shop, different route to the studio. Don't go anywhere alone after dark." "Jesus Christ, Dad, what happened? Did someone threaten you?" The question hung between them like a blade. Someone had threatened her, but explaining that would require explaining why. And explaining why would mean destroying every careful lie he'd built their relationship on. Elena knew her father had been a cop, knew he'd left the force under circumstances he preferred not to discuss. She didn't know about the bodies he'd left behind, or the secrets he'd buried in unmarked graves across 3 decades of survival. "Just promise me." "I promise." "But Dad, I have to go. I love you." He ended the call before she could press further, before his resolve cracked completely and he told her everything. The garage felt smaller now, contaminated by the knowledge that somewhere in Los Angeles, someone was watching his daughter with patient, professional eyes, someone who knew exactly how to destroy him by destroying what he loved most. Back in his apartment, Vinny retrieved the wooden box from behind the cereal. The photograph seemed even more damning in afternoon light. The timestamp, the blood, his younger face frozen in that moment of absolute moral compromise. But it was the letter that drew his attention now, particularly the final lines. "I know where Elena lives, where she works, where she buys her morning coffee." Specific knowledge, current intelligence. Whoever was blackmailing him hadn't just preserved evidence from 1962, they'd been actively monitoring his life, collecting leverage, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The camera lens symbol in the corner seemed to pulse with malevolent significance, a mark left by someone who understood that secrets, like wine, became more valuable with age. 71 hours and 43 minutes remaining. $2 million he didn't have, to protect a daughter who didn't know she needed protecting, from consequences of choices made before she was born. The bourbon bottle called to him again, promising temporary amnesia. This time, he answered. The bourbon tasted like liquid regret, burning down his throat with the familiar comfort of self-destruction. 3 fingers became 4, then 5, as afternoon light faded through the apartment windows and the weight of 33 years pressed against his chest like a physical thing. Vinny found himself staring at the reel-to-reel tape, its innocent appearance masking whatever truths lay wound between its magnetic layers. The tape recorder in his closet, a vintage Tandberg he'd kept for reasons he'd never fully examined, seemed to mock him from across the room. "Play me," it whispered. "Find out what you really did that night." The bourbon made the decision for him. His hands shook as he threaded the tape through the machine, muscle memory from a different era guiding fingers that had operated surveillance equipment in smoky back rooms and police station basements. The Tandberg hummed to life, its mechanical heartbeat filling the apartment with anticipatory dread. Static first, then voices, but not the voices he expected. Position at the service entrance. Target is confirmed in room 1612. Vinny's blood went cold. Professional radio communication, the clipped precision of trained surveillance teams. This wasn't the intimate recording he remembered from Monroe's dress. This was operational chatter, the kind of coordination that required multiple agents and serious funding. Roger Torino's in the lobby, badge clearly visible, right on schedule. His own name, spoken with casual familiarity by someone who'd been watching him even then. Vinny reached for the bourbon bottle with hands that trembled beyond alcohol's excuse. Package delivery confirmed. Marcelli's moving to intercept. Package delivery. The words hit him like a physical blow. In his memory, Tony Marcelli had been there to kill Monroe, a desperate assassin hired by unknown enemies to silence America's most vulnerable sweetheart. But surveillance teams didn't call murder attempts package deliveries. They called actual deliveries package deliveries. The tape continued, voices overlapping with the casual efficiency of people who work together regularly. Torino's taking the bait beautifully. Thinks he's playing hero, amateur. These ex-cops always think they're smarter than they are. Monroe's cooperation has been exemplary. Almost makes you feel bad about what happens next. Cooperation. Vinny's vision blurred, and not from the bourbon. Marilyn Monroe cooperating with surveillance teams. Marilyn Monroe alive and working with the very people who were supposed to be threatening her. Phase 2 initiation in 3 minutes. Marcelli's expendable once Torino pulls the trigger. The room spun around him as understanding crashed through his alcohol-soaked consciousness like a sledgehammer through glass. Tony Marcelli hadn't been there to kill Monroe. Tony had been there to deliver something, information, photographs, evidence, something that required his death to keep secret. And Vinny had been the unwitting executioner, manipulated into committing murder by people who'd studied his psychology like a textbook. Beautiful work. Torino just eliminated our liability and thinks he saved the day. Asset secured, witness neutralized, Patsy convinced he's a hero. A different voice now. One that made Vinny's blood freeze in his veins. Magnificent, darling. Simply magnificent. Monroe's breathy whisper, but without the vulnerability he remembered. This voice carried cold satisfaction, the tone of someone reviewing a successful performance. Vincent played his part perfectly. Such a noble boy, so eager to rescue helpless women. The tape continued, but Vinny could no longer focus on individual words. The apartment tilted around him as 33 years of carefully constructed truth crumbled into dust. He hadn't saved Marilyn Monroe, he'd been played by her. The vulnerable starlet, the innocent victim, the woman whose life he'd thought he was protecting. She'd been the architect of her own false death, and Tony Marcelli's real murder. But why? The answer came in Monroe's next words, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather. Bobby's little recordings are safely transferred, and the only person who knew about Tony's courier work is dead. Vincent's guilt will keep him quiet forever. Men like him never recover from killing innocents. By tomorrow, everyone will believe I'm dead, and I'll be free to disappear with everything I need to live very, very comfortably. Bobby, Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General whose affair with Monroe had been Hollywood's worst-kept secret. The man whose political career would have been destroyed by whatever information Tony Marcelli had been carrying that night. Vinny yanked the tape from the machine with violent force, magnetic ribbons spilling across his coffee table like electronic entrails. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, Tommy's number highlighted on the screen. "You lying bastard," he whispered to the empty apartment. "You knew. You all knew." But before he could dial, a new sound froze his finger above the screen. The soft scrape of a key in his front door lock. Deliberate, professional. The sound of someone who'd been watching, waiting for exactly this moment of discovery. The door opened to reveal a figure he hadn't seen in 33 years but recognized immediately. Older now, silver-haired instead of platinum blonde, but unmistakably alive. "Hello, Vincent," Marilyn Monroe said, stepping into his apartment with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "I think it's time we discussed your severance package." The bourbon glass slipped from Vinny's fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor with a sound like gunfire. For 33 years he'd carried the weight of her death, the guilt, the nightmares, the carefully managed grief for a woman he thought he'd failed to save. Now she stood in his doorway, very much alive, wearing expensive clothes and the kind of confidence that came from decades of successful deception. "You're supposed to be dead." The words came out as barely a whisper. "Death is remarkably liberating, Vincent. I recommend it." She closed the door behind her with the casual familiarity of someone who belonged there, her eyes taking in the scattered tape, the bourbon stains spreading across his floor, the general wreckage of his emotional collapse. "Though I see you've been making quite a mess of your grieving process." Vinny's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon, muscle memory overriding shock, but she noticed the movement and laughed. Not the breathy, vulnerable sound he remembered, but something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "Oh, Vincent. Still playing the hero after all these years? How wonderfully consistent." She settled into his reading chair with the poise of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. "Though I suppose killing unarmed women might present some ethical challenges, even for you." Tony Marcelli was unarmed too. The words hung between them like an accusation. Her smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered in her eyes, the look of a chess player whose opponent had finally noticed the board. Poor Tony. Such a dedicated courier. Did you know he had 3 children? Little ones, barely old enough for school. He was trying to go legitimate, taking small delivery jobs to supplement his plumbing income. She examined her manicured nails with theatrical indifference. Bobby Kennedy's private recordings were worth quite a lot to certain interested parties. Worth enough to arrange a very elaborate death scene. "You used me." His voice gained strength as rage began to burn through the shock. "You manipulated me into murdering an innocent man. I provided you with an opportunity to be the hero you so desperately wanted to be. The fact that you chose to kill first and ask questions later isn't really my responsibility, is it?" Vinny's vision blurred with something beyond alcohol. The careful walls he'd built around that night. The justifications, the noble motivations, the belief that he'd saved a vulnerable woman crumbled completely. In their place rose a truth so ugly it threatened to choke him. He'd been a useful idiot, dancing to music he couldn't even hear. "Elena," he said quietly, "you leave my daughter out of this." "Oh, Vincent." Her laugh was genuine now, delighted by some private joke. "Elena's been part of this from the beginning. Do you really think it's a coincidence that she ended up in Hollywood? That her career took off so smoothly? That she never lacked for opportunities or connections?" The apartment seemed to tilt around him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've been a very attentive guardian angel. Elena's success, her safety, her beautiful life, all of it has been carefully orchestrated. My gift to you for services rendered." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that familiar whisper. "But gifts can be revoked, Vincent. Careers can be destroyed. Beautiful young actresses can disappear into the kind of darkness that even their fathers can't protect them from. You're insane." "I'm practical." Robert Kennedy's recordings contained information that certain people needed to disappear. Tony Marcelli was carrying copies to parties who would have used them very inappropriately. The situation required a permanent solution, and you provided one with such touching nobility. Vinny's mind raced through the implications. 33 years of assumptions reshaping themselves into a pattern too horrifying to fully accept. The blackmail, the photographs, That was you. A retirement fund, darling. $2 million is hardly unreasonable for 3 decades of silence, don't you think? Plus interest. She stood gracefully, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. You have 68 hours remaining. The payment instructions are quite clear. And if I refuse? Her smile became something beautiful and terrible. Then Elena learns exactly what kind of man her father really is. The press learns that Marilyn Monroe's tragic death was actually an elaborate hoax, and certain government agencies learn that one of their most valuable operations was compromised by a trigger-happy ex-cop with delusions of heroism. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. Oh, and Vincent? That recording you just heard? Elena will receive a copy if payment isn't made on schedule. I think she'll be particularly interested in the parts where you discuss watching her sleep as a child, making sure she was safe, so protective, so devoted. Some might even call it obsessive. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Vinny alone with the wreckage of everything he'd believed about himself, his choices, and the woman he'd spent 33 years mourning. In the silence that followed, one truth crystallized with perfect clarity. Marilyn Monroe had been right about one thing. Death was remarkably liberating, and someone was about to die. #Chapter 8, Climax. The bourbon bottle became a weapon in Vinny's hand before conscious thought could intervene. 33 years of carefully managed rage crystallized into pure, focused violence as he hurled it against the door where Marilyn Monroe had just stood. Glass exploded across the apartment like shrapnel from a bomb, amber liquid painting the walls with the color of wasted years. Bitch! The word tore from his throat with 3 decades of suppressed fury. Lying, manipulative bitch! But rage, however pure, couldn't sustain itself forever. As the echoes died and glass settled into silence, a different emotion took its place, something colder, more surgical. The transformation felt like slipping into an old coat, muscle memory from his years carrying a shield when justice meant more than survival. Vinny wiped blood from his hand where glass had bit him, examining the shallow cuts with clinical detachment. Pain was information. Information was power. And power was what he'd need to destroy the woman who'd made him dance like a puppet for 33 years. His phone buzzed against the coffee table, Elena's name lighting up the screen like a beacon in the wreckage of his apartment. For a moment he considered answering. Imagine trying to explain that her entire life had been orchestrated by a dead woman who wasn't dead. But how do you tell your daughter that her success, her safety, her beautiful career were all built on the foundation of her father's greatest shame? The phone fell silent, then immediately began ringing again. This time he answered, "Elena, I told you I'd call." "Dad?" Her voice carried a tremor that made his blood freeze. "There's a woman here. She says she knows you from the old days. She's asking about some recordings, about money you owe her." The apartment spun around Vinny as understanding hit him like a physical blow. Monroe hadn't come to gloat. She'd come to establish an alibi while someone else paid Elena a visit. The ultimate chess move from someone who'd been playing the game for decades longer than anyone realized. "Where are you?" His voice came out deadly calm, the tone that had once made suspects confess before interrogation even began. "At my apartment. Dad, I'm scared. She knows things about our family, about Mom. She knows about that scar on my shoulder from when I fell off the bike, the one I never talk about in interviews. Intimate details. The kind of information that required years of surveillance, professional patience, the resources to watch and wait and learn everything about someone's life." Monroe hadn't just orchestrated Elena's career. She'd been studying her, collecting ammunition for exactly this moment. "Listen to me very carefully," Vinny said, moving toward his bedroom closet where certain tools from his previous life waited in darkness. "You're going to walk out of there right now. Don't pack anything, don't explain, don't negotiate, just leave. She says if I go anywhere, she'll release recordings of you talking about me, about watching me sleep." "Dad, what is she talking about?" The words hit him like bullets. Those conversations, the late-night confessions to Sarah about his fears, his need to protect Elena from a world that had already taken too much from him. Private moments between a traumatized cop and his worried wife, somehow recorded and preserved like evidence in a case that had never closed. Elena. She's playing them now, Dad. I can hear your voice. You're talking about making sure she's safe, always watching, always protecting. You sound—" her voice broke. "You sound obsessed." Vinny's hand found the familiar weight of his service weapon, the Glock that had been his companion through decades of Hollywood's darkness. But this wasn't about firepower. This was about psychological warfare waged by someone who understood that the deepest cuts came from love turned into weapon. "She's lying," he said, though even he could hear how weak it sounded. "Whatever she's showing you, whatever you're hearing, it's not what it seems. Then explain it to me. Explain why a dead movie star is sitting in my living room playing recordings of my father talking about me like I'm some kind of obsession project." Dead movie star. Elena didn't even know who she was dealing with. To her, Marilyn Monroe was just another Hollywood ghost story, not the very much alive architect of her family's destruction. "I'm coming to get you," Vinny said, checking his weapon with hands that no longer trembled. "Whatever happens, whatever she tells you, remember that everything I did was to keep you safe." "Dad." The line went dead. Either Elena had hung up or someone had made the decision for her. Both possibilities led to the same conclusion. 33 years of running from his choices had just come to an end. Vinny looked at his reflection in the shattered glass scattered across his floor. A broken man in a broken apartment, finally ready to stop pretending he was anything other than what he'd always been. Not a hero, not a protector. Just a killer who'd learned to live with blood on his hands. Time to remind Marilyn Monroe why. Chapter 9, Resolution. The drive to Elena's apartment took 17 minutes through Burbank's late-night emptiness, but Vinny experienced it as a single crystalline moment of perfect clarity. No radio chatter, no thoughts of escape routes or tactical advantages, just the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the weight of his service weapon against his ribs, old companions settling into familiar patterns one final time. He parked across the street from Elena's building, noting the black sedan with tinted windows that didn't belong to the neighborhood. Professional surveillance, expensive and obvious in the way that suggested confidence rather than incompetence. Monroe wanted him to see it, wanted him to understand that this final move had been planned with the same meticulous care as everything else. The lobby security camera tracked his approach with mechanical indifference. Somewhere, he knew, someone was watching his every step, cataloging his movements for whatever story would need to be told afterward. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending toward judgment. Elena's door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway like an invitation. Through the gap he could hear voices, his daughter's tight with fear, another woman smooth with the kind of practiced authority that came from decades of getting exactly what she wanted. "Understand that your father has been carrying a terrible burden," Monroe was saying as Vinny approached. "The guilt of taking a life, even in defense of others, changes a man, makes him see threats everywhere, especially around the people he loves most." Vinny pushed the door open without knocking. Elena sat rigid on her white leather sofa, hands clasped in her lap like a child awaiting punishment. Across from her, Monroe had positioned herself with careful theatricality, backlit by the window, silver hair catching the ambient city glow. "Vincent," she said without turning. "Right on schedule, as always. Let her go." His voice carried no emotion, no negotiation. "This is between us. Everything has always been between us, darling. Elena's just been the most beautiful witness." Monroe finally turned, and for a moment, Vinny saw something unexpected in her expression, not triumph, but a kind of profound weariness. "Tell me, after 33 years of guilt, how does it feel to learn you never saved anyone?" Elena looked between them with growing horror. "Dad, what is she talking about? Who did you kill?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Vinny found himself remembering another moment of truth. August 1962, the Ambassador Hotel, Tony Marcelli's surprised face in the seconds before the bullets found their mark, the weight of choices that had seemed so clear in the moment, so impossibly complex in hindsight. "A man named Tony Marcelli," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was being a hero." "But you were," Elena said, confusion replacing fear. "If someone was trying to hurt her—" "He wasn't." The words came easier than Vinny had expected. He was delivering information that certain people needed to disappear. She orchestrated her own death to escape with stolen government secrets, and I was the useful idiot who eliminated the only witness. Monroe's laugh carried no humor. Such drama, Vincent. You make it sound so sordid. It was sordid. He stepped further into the room, noting the recording equipment on Elena's coffee table, the photographs scattered like evidence of crimes not yet committed. You used my guilt to control me for 33 years. You used my love for my daughter to build her career on blood money. I used your choices to create opportunities, Monroe corrected. Elena's talent, her success, those are real. I simply removed certain obstacles. Elena stood slowly, understanding finally dawning in her expression. My career, everything I've worked for, is yours, Vinny said firmly. Whatever she provided, whatever doors she opened, the work was yours. The talent was yours. She just cleared the path. How touching, Monroe observed. Father and daughter, united in their delusions of earned success. She reached for her purse with casual elegance. But delusions don't pay debts, Vincent. $2 million, 67 hours remaining. No. The word fell into silence like a stone into still water. Monroe's hand froze above her purse, her expression shifting from confident control to something approaching surprise. I'm not paying you a goddamn thing, Vinny continued. Not money, not silence, not one more second of my life. Elena knows the truth now. The rest of the world can learn it too, if that's what you want. Vincent, I killed an innocent man because I believed in something that wasn't real. I've carried that weight for 33 years, let it define every choice I've made since. He looked at Elena, seeing his own eyes reflected in her face, his own stubborn determination. But I won't let that weight crush my daughter's future. Monroe's composure finally cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. You don't understand what you're destroying. The recordings, the evidence. There are people who will kill to keep those secrets buried. Then let them come. Vinny's hand moved to his weapon, not as threat but as statement of fact. I've been running from my choices for 33 years. I'm done running. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of traffic 15 stories below. Finally, Monroe nodded slowly, recognition of something like respect flickering in her expression. You really are going to destroy everything, aren't you? She said softly. Your reputation, Elena's career, your own life, all of it, just to stop playing my game. Some games aren't worth winning. She gathered her photographs with movements that suggested finality rather than defeat. Very well, Vincent. But remember, I gave you every opportunity to handle this quietly. I remember everything, he said, including the fact that you're still the same frightened woman who faked her own death rather than face the consequences of her choices. Monroe paused at the door, her mask of control slipping completely for just a moment. In the gap, Vinny glimpsed something almost human, regret perhaps, or the shadow of roads not taken. Goodbye, Vincent, she said. I hope your principles comfort you in the darkness that's coming. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving father and daughter alone with the weight of 33 years of buried truth. Elena moved to the window, watching the black sedan pull away into Burbank's neon-lit night. What happens now? Vinny joined her at the window, noting how the city lights caught the silver threads in her dark hair, his mother's coloring, Sarah's gentle strength, but something uniquely her own in the determined set of her jaw. Now we deal with the consequences, he said. Together. The recordings, the evidence she mentioned. Surface when they surface. We'll face it then. He touched her shoulder gently, feeling the familiar scar from a childhood bike accident that somehow Monroe had cataloged and weaponized. Elena, I need you to know that everything I did, every choice I made, was to protect me. I know, Dad. She leaned against him, and for a moment they were just father and daughter again, watching their city breathe beneath them. The question is, what do we do tomorrow? Vinny considered the question, feeling something like peace settle over him for the first time in decades. Tomorrow would bring consequences, media attention, possible criminal charges, the collapse of carefully constructed lies that had protected them both. But it would also bring something he'd forgotten was possible, the freedom that came from telling the truth. Tomorrow, he said, we start over. The city sprawled below them, 8 million people carrying their own secrets, their own buried shames, their own desperate attempts to protect the people they loved. Somewhere in that vast constellation of light and shadow, Marilyn Monroe was disappearing again, into new identities, new schemes, new ways of turning other people's guilt into currency. But that was tomorrow's problem, for tomorrow's version of themselves. Tonight, for the first time in 33 years, Vincent Torino was exactly where he belonged, standing guard over his daughter, no longer haunted by the ghost of a woman who had never really died. The weight on his shoulders felt different now, not lighter but cleaner somehow. The weight of truth instead of deception, the weight of choice instead of manipulation. It was a burden he could finally carry.